Delmarva Today with Don Rush.
There's been a growing awareness of the tick-borne Lyme disease, particularly here on the Eastern Shore. If you're listening to Delmarva Today, this is Don Rush. But beyond the growing statistics, there are the personal struggles with a disease that can strike without warning. There's a new novel entitled Lyme Wars, a love story, which captures the devastating impact on one particular family. And its author, our former program director, Pam Andrews, is in the studio to talk about it. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me, Don.
So, first of all, what inspired you to write this novel, and particularly the novel approach, as opposed to just simply giving people information about what to look for and stories about people who actually have it? You turned this into a novel.
Well, one thing that instigated me to do the novel was that there are lots and lots of people out there who are researching why tick-borne diseases are so devastating. There are lots of people out there who are giving their personal stories about what went wrong in their diagnosis and treatment and why they got chronic Lyme disease. I was trying to put it all together. I helped start a regional Lyme association called Lyme Disease Association of Delmarva, and that was in 2003. And since that time, we have been holding meetings up until the pandemic when we stopped having public meetings, but we held public meetings every month. So I got to hear the stories of person after person after person who came down with Lyme disease and the co-infections of other diseases that went along with Lyme. I felt through a novel I could kind of put this all together in a way that explored a more universal look at what goes wrong when you have a family facing Lyme disease and the medical community isn't recognizing it. Maybe parents don't understand what's going wrong with their child, and the person isn't getting any support along the way. So it's a very difficult situation to be in.
How much of this novel reflects this kinds of stories that you heard?
A lot of it. Not only did I hear our regional stories, but I've also been to a number of conferences, most of them medical conferences, that were being presented to give seminars for doctors on tick-borne diseases. So I got to hear it from both angles. I got to hear it from the patients who were struggling to get diagnosed and treatment and get well, and from doctors who were struggling to find out what is the scientific basis of all this? Why aren't people getting well with a month's worth of doxycycline, which is what the Infectious Disease Society says works, and it doesn't?
So in terms of the stories, any particular stories, by the way, that struck you? I know you've obviously incorporated some of them into the novel, but any particular moment as you heard people talk about their own stories that struck you?
Do you know the most striking thing that sticks in my mind is there have been only a very few times that this has happened, but in traveling around maybe Salisbury and seeing folks who have been through this struggle, and one woman in particular introduced me to her friend saying, "This is the woman who saved my life." And I was just awestruck that she would say that, because I'm not a medical person. My area of study has always been music. So to have someone introduce me like that was just stunning in a way. And I realized what she was saying was, through our organization, we gave her the tools that she needed so that she could go find good help among the medical community and really get well again.
So how much of this novel is your story?
Not a lot. A lot of it, well, in a way, some of it is because my youngest daughter, got Lyme disease in 1991, and she went through 13 doctors, 9 years, 13 doctors, and 3 medical institutions on our way to try to figure out what was wrong. And it was just very difficult to deal with, because primary care doctors were saying things like, she isn't really sick, she's making this up, maybe it's a mental problem, not a physical problem. So we thought, well, if it's mental, we need to find that out. Whatever is wrong, we need to find out the cause to get her well again. So I took her to a psychiatrist, and he talked to her for 3 days to examine everything that was going on with her. And he came back to me and said, she is not mentally ill. She is physically ill, and you just need to keep on going. And what happened, the reason we went to 13 different doctors is during the course of this, and she had a very potent case of Lyme disease. One body system after another fell apart. So we were going to different specialists to try to figure out what was going on with this system, what was going on with that system. And it wasn't until 2000 that we finally found a doctor who said this is Lyme disease.
Given the uncertainty that a lot of people with this disease have in terms of going to these various doctors, not necessarily knowing that they have it, these mysterious symptoms, as it were, and you're trying to think, well, what's wrong? How do we fix it, or how do we get something to be able to cope with, or at least identify it? What kind of emotional impact does that have on one? That uncertainty, that confusion before you really find out what the problem is.
Oh, it's just devastating because often the family members are part of looking at the problem and saying, I don't know what's going on. You know, we've tried everything. The doctors many times don't understand. But sort of like through word of mouth, many times folks find out, or they know of a tick bite that was not treated correctly or long enough. Many times I've heard chronic Lyme disease is a treatment failure when the disease was not treated long enough, or they're finding that just doxycycline, which is the go-to medicine, doesn't always work, and sometimes it makes it worse. Dr. Ying Zhang from the Bloomberg School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins did a study and found out, amazingly, that many times essential oils were more potent in eradicating the disease than doxycycline. And he also found out that just one antibiotic, doxycycline, does not really eradicate the disease. Sometimes you need a combination.
The disease, by the way, it sort of protect itself as it gets bombarded by these treatments?
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked that question, Don. What happens when the body is infused with antibiotics is that the spirochete, which is kind of like a corkscrew shape, changes form and it closes up into a cyst. And it just, the antibiotics can't get through the outer shell of the cyst. And when you stop taking antibiotics, that cyst opens and several spirochetes come out. Also, the body, or I should say the spirochetes, the pathogen that creates Lyme disease, can form in biofilms. And that's sort of like, mucus sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. But it also is a haven within the body for these pathogens. And therefore, the antibiotics don't get to them because they're in biofilms. Or sometimes they go to places where, in the body, where the antibiotics can't get to. It's just a matter of they are, with their corkscrew shape, able to drill just about anywhere in the body, even go through the brain barrier and get into the brain. So it's a very potent pathogen.
Now, I want to get to your novel here. And at the outset, the thing that struck me, and I want to focus on that before we get into what she describes when she finds out that she has this disease. But this is sort of a couple that's got a bright future. I mean, she's going to be a dancer. He's a basketball star, that kind of thing. Describe that first blush, I guess, of optimism, of youth, and the fact that their entire lives are in front of them.
Oh, yes. I, on purpose, selected a couple, and again, this is a fictitious couple, but I think it does represent what can happen with Lyme disease, because many athletes have come down with Lyme disease in real life, and many times wealthy people have gotten Lyme disease, and they have the resources to go out and get treatments from all over the world. So I wanted to represent a couple that wasn't, poor me, already a little sick or disabled person that didn't have a good immune system. These are young folks who have wonderful immune systems. They're out there, they have their lives before them, and yet when put in a situation where they get bitten by ticks, they do succumb to Lyme disease and the co-infections. One of the co-infections that is presented in this is Bartonella, which not only has physical implications, but mental implications too, as does Lyme disease.
So describe for me when Francesca begins to realize that there's something wrong, because she's gone to New York, she's trying to aspire to be this dancer, and then it just sort of comes on.
It does. And many times a healthy immune system will deal with the pathogens that cause Lyme disease. And the person can feel okay and go through maybe years of life with this. And it's when something happens that you push your body too far, like Francesca did. She was dancing in the Nutcracker and, pushed to do her very best at ballet. And then her body wouldn't take it anymore, and she just fell apart. She had no energy. She was very sick. So it can be when you confront your body with too much of a demand. It can be physical. It can be emotional. It can be the death of a loved one. It can be going through a divorce, something like that. But for my heroine, it's a matter of she physically pushes herself too far.
And we do know, at least we seem to know anyway, the moment this happens with David.
Yes, we do. I try to, in this book, go to various sites around Delmarva. And one of the sites that I chose was Assateague Island. And the reason I chose that is that we feel that's where my daughter actually got Lyme disease, but that's beside the point.
Right.
David goes with his friends to Assateague, and through trying to evade a horse that was about to attack him, goes into the underbrush and then gets caught with ticks that they don't discover until hours later.
And it doesn't seem as if they're very concerned at that point.
Well, they're young, they're in love. What's a tick here or there?
Right. I mean, it's when exploring this for a moment, because one of the things that strikes me is that we have this eastern shore, lots of foliage, trees, the Assateague as you describe it, and it's almost like maybe it's not a good idea for me to be out there because we have this problem with ticks and this particular disease. I mean, you could go out and by accident get it.
Yes, and just about any place on Delmarva you can do that, or the whole Northeast, actually. And part of it is recognizing that you need to take preventative measures, which I don't really get into very much because they didn't do that.
Right. So in terms of their marriage, it begins to go downhill, and it's almost as if they're not quite sure why. Describe that for me. I mean, that because we don't really think about that. We think about people getting sick, or they're getting, they have fatigue, that kind of thing. But all that stuff then eventually creates a stress.
Don, this is one of the main reasons I wanted to write this book, was to show that not only are the patients with Lyme disease having to battle the medical system, and the families all many times are involved in trying to just know how to support them and not really understanding. But it also affects all your family relationships, love relationships, marriages. I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken with actual real people in my travels around and dealing with Lyme disease, and how it has been a very big strain on marriages.
Describe for me, in this particular instance, what happens to this couple that they just sort of break apart, and apparently he obviously has it as well.
The issue is that, as I said, Bartonella, which is the main thing that David is dealing with, creates emotional, mental health problems. One of the salient parts of having Bartonella is that you suddenly are in a rage for no reason at all. And I've had Bartonella. I have personally experienced that. Fortunately, I was not in a position that where David got, where it was out of control, because I understood, I'd gotten enough education on tick-borne diseases to realize that this was Bartonella, because I had some of the other symptoms like feet that hurt and that sort of thing. But he did not pay attention to the fact, he thought it was just getting old, or why are my feet hurting? Why am I not able to control my moods? This sort of thing. And it really does happen.
I mean, towards the end of the book, there's this realization, I guess, that
Right. Finally, he realizes that, well, actually, I think probably Francesca has been telling him all along, I think you have Bartonella, I think you have tick-borne diseases. And there's a certain amount of denial there, which is also part of what we deal with when I cannot tell you how many people I've known in my own family that I've said things like, I think this is Lyme disease. And the comeback is, you think everything is Lyme disease. And it turns out, by God, I was right. No, I have had grandchildren with Lyme disease and a niece and a nephew with Lyme disease. So it's all around us. And I cannot tell you the number of times when I bring up Lyme disease because of my work with the Lyme disease organization, people will tell me, oh, I know someone who just was diagnosed. And it happens over and over and over again.
Oh, because one of the things that strikes me, there's this great debate about Lyme disease and being a clinical diagnosis, as opposed to necessarily finding the specifics. And that seems to be one of the big problems. Is there are all these symptoms, which could be anything.
It could be anything, yes.
Right, and so you might want to go there, but then you want to check out everything else. I mean, it seems that confusion, I think, is what I think generates a lot of this.
Part of the problem harkens back to the Infectious Disease Society. For whatever reason, for many, many years, I'm talking 30 years, I'm talking decades here, have insisted that Lyme disease is hard to catch, easy to cure, a month's worth of antibiotics cures it, and there is no such thing as chronic Lyme disease. And all of that has been proven wrong over and over and over again by very well-designed research.
So one of the moments, I think, in the book that struck me, we were talking about this disease sort of like onset and how devastating it can be, is this encounter that's at their home. There's a event going on, and Molly, her friend, asks Francesca if she's okay, if somebody had hurt her. Francesca replies, I just can't get up. I'm so exhausted I can't get up. And then she goes on to say, it's not a matter of resting. I can't stand on my legs. They aren't working. I can't walk. I mean, that's a pretty devastating conclusion.
It is. And I have personally known people right here in Salisbury that has happened to. And I have never been in a position where I could not walk. But I have been in a position, which I talk about in this book, where you are so exhausted that you have to plan, can I go to the bathroom and then also have enough energy left to go get a glass of water in the kitchen? Doesn't that sound strange? To have your energy level so depleted that you can't do both. And that's what Lyme disease can do.
In some ways, that reminds me of the stories that I've been told about COVID.
Right, yes. I think that when they are talking about long COVID, and there's a lot of controversy about, that's not real, we have proven with Lyme disease that, yes, you can have your body just be that absolutely exhausted.
So in terms, by the way, of this realization that occurs, is there some satisfaction or some upside that if you finally discover what it is, that's the problem? And we talked about this confusion and uncertainty, but I mean, is there a certain plus, at least now I know?
Oh, exactly. I will never forget the day when my daughter and I were up in Baltimore, and we finally got the diagnosis of Lyme disease. And we were absolutely exuberant because we knew now what we were fighting. We didn't know a lot about how to do that, but we knew what we were fighting.
So in terms of the novel, what kind of lessons do you think people should be drawing from this? Because there's a lot of actually various events that go as she moves through her entire life. But what is it you want people to take away here?
I want to have people take away, well, first of all, I want the people who have had Lyme disease to feel seen and heard. And I want the general public, upon reading this, to understand just how devastating this can be. And I want them to know that people who have been through struggles and hard times and had really bad things happen to them are still good people who are trying their best. And many times they have grown and become better people because they have fought this fight and come out and understood what life can be, even going through all these struggles.
So when you look at the medical establishment, where do you think it's at?
My goodness. We have pluses and minuses, as they say. There are doctors that have been active in the Lyme community for decades that are my heroes. They have stood up for our Lyme patients in the face of ridicule, in the face of maybe losing their license, which some of them have, in the face of maybe not understanding totally themselves because we needed so much more research to do. There are heroes in the medical community, and then there are others that are in it for the money and just will not listen to the patients, will not listen to the new research.
Do you think that people who don't listen or who don't appear to understand the disease, is it just simply that they haven't moved outside of the comfort zone, or is it that they have a whole set of methods that they use in order to diagnose people for whatever it is, and they become sort of tunnel vision?
A phrase that I've heard used, and I can hardly believe this myself, but I've heard it myself, they didn't teach us that in med school. Now, the question that follows is, how long has it been since you were in med school? And, I hesitate to say that because I'm not against the whole medical community. I'm just against not understanding how absolutely devastating tick-borne diseases can be, and that there are many doctors and patients who are trying their very best to overcome this disease.
Do you find that in Eastern Shore, do you find a growing awareness of this within the medical community? What's
Do you know? Yes. There are still those that are just holding on to the old ways and don't seem to want to give way. But I am just absolutely thrilled when someone will come up to me and say, I went to the ER and they checked me for Lyme disease. They were open to it. With myself and other family members having a history of Lyme disease, and you go in and the doctor says, well, let's talk about this Lyme disease. That's wonderful. Just even being able to look at it and evaluate it doesn't mean that every time that's what it is. It could be something absolutely different. But as long as you're not going to close down and close out and say, no, I'm not going to look at that. And actually, doctors have said that. One doctor in real life said to one of my family members, if you mention Lyme disease again, I'm going to call social services and report you for mistreating your daughter.
That's outrageous.
Isn't that outrageous? That's a true story.
So, and one of the things we've talked about this is there's some tests, but a lot of this tends to be a clinical analysis, right? Diagnosis. Is that,
it is.
And so which makes it even more difficult, right?
It is.
It's not like oh, you've got a certain bacteria. I spot it, and we can get rid of it.
The clinical diagnosis is very difficult because when many of the tests are looking for the body's reaction to the spirochete, they're not looking for the spirochete itself. It's looking for your immune system's reaction to the spirochete. Now, there are tests that are actually looking for the bugs themselves, which is wonderful, but A, they take longer, and B, they're more expensive, and C, the insurance company doesn't want to pay for it. So that's why widespread across the whole nation, that does not work.
But you can identify these bugs, as it were, for lack of a better word. Yeah. I mean, you can. I mean, unlike maybe say 20 or 30 years ago, you can really kind of find if you do the right tests and do that.
Yes.
As opposed to looking for like the reaction to them, right? There's like those two systems.
That's right. Yes. And there's a lot of research going on, and I have a lot of hope. We're trying to find a cure, not just something that will help you get some better. We want a cure.
So in terms, by the way, of getting treated, what's the cost? I mean, how are the insurance companies reacting? I can imagine that this could be financially pretty draining.
It's devastating. I probably myself have, and I have not written this down, but it's within the possibility that I've spent well over $100,000. Now, a lot of that is not for medicines that insurance companies won't pay, although there is that. But as I mentioned, many of these methods that we use to overcome Lyme disease and the co-infections are things that you buy through your apothecary that, are essential oils, they're supplements, they're things that your body recognizes as almost food-like. It's not a pharmaceutical and is maybe easier to accept by the body. So there's that, but all that costs money.
Why do those work, by the way? Why do oils and that sort of thing work? Well, one would not think so, but
I know. Well, actually, oils can be very,
how do we
very
know?
potent. Well, another thing is a lot of the pharmaceuticals, maybe most of the pharmaceuticals we use, are modeled after natural things already on the planet. Maybe natural substances are examined to see what effects they will have on the body to help us get well.
In terms of going forward, then, do you find the government is responding positively at all, or are we stuck in this?
We
With the
have
CDC
worked
and so
so
on.
hard. The Congress put together the Tick-Borne Diseases Working Group, and it's TB something or the other else for the but that has been meeting for years in Washington. There were representatives there from the Infectious Disease Society that didn't want us to move forward at all. Then many of our groups, the organizations that represent the patients, and Lyme literate doctors went and tried to get us to move forward. It's very difficult because all along the way, we've had the Infectious Disease Society working against the interest of the patients.
Why do you think that is?
They own patents. They make money off the status quo.
You just think it's money.
I think it's money.
And
also just sometimes if you feel like this is your field and you know absolutely all of this and you're not willing to open your mind and look at new research, there's that.
So when you look forward, are you optimistic then that you said a moment ago that you were hoping to find a cure, and hopefully that's down the road, but what kind of optimism do you have? You've been living this for a long time, and certainly
Yes.
your daughter has as well.
I am optimistic, and the reason I say that is that there is a lot of research going on. Every day I read journals from our main physicians and researchers that are putting out really good studies and finding new things out every day. Now, there are those research studies where they're researching the same old thing over and over again, and it's a joke. I could mention some that are actually along that line, but I won't.
So how are you doing? You have this disease.
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
And that's not to say there aren't days that head south, but actually part of Dr. Ying Zhang's protocol was a pill that has been put together on his protocol, which has oregano oil and cinnamon bark and some other things in there that are all combined into one capsule. And I take those all the time. I live with them. And by the way, I also have never had COVID, and I haven't had a cold for a very long time.
We're going to all run out and get it there.
They're out there now. They're expensive, but they're out there.
So do you still have to measure your days, your plans?
Oh, absolutely.
So that you don't.
I have to measure how much energy I have very carefully. And I have to do things like I can't drink alcohol. I can't have champagne for New Year's. I can't have wine. A taste maybe,
Mm-hmm,
then
right.
that's it. But that's an easy decision to make when knowing that by doing these things you will feel much better and able to live a good life.
Do you get fatigued from time to time?
Oh,
Is
yes.
it-
Yes.
And let me ask you this, because you worked here a long time
I
as a
did.
program director, which
25
requires
years.
a lot of effort, as we all know. Is there a difference from working here or being at work as opposed to now being able at least to have some control of your time?
Yes, there is a difference. when I was here, I would many times have to just shut my door at noon and take a break. And I described to those who were working with me what was going on. I need a half an hour of downtime to just get myself together again. And I wasn't doing anything wonderful or mysterious. I was just prop my feet up and rest.
So at this point, tell us what you're doing. I mean, since you left the work world, I mean, how do you keep busy, and how does that fit in with what you've got?
Well, I wrote this book called Lyme Disease, a Love Story, and it took years to do it. And the main reason it took years is that I'm also president of the Lyme Disease Association of Delmarva, and that takes a lot of time. And my daughter, who is disabled with chronic Lyme disease, requires a lot of attention.
How's she doing at this point?
Her body was so compromised by Lyme by the end of the 9 years that we tend to move from one problem to another, which the doctor who diagnosed her said that he would expect that.
So, but for the moment, you're okay.
I am better than okay. I'm great.
Well, we were speaking with Pam Andrews. She's a former program director here at Delmarva Public Media, but also she has written a new novel entitled Lyme Wars, a Love Story, which captures really the devastating impact on one particular family from Lyme disease. We appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
And I appreciate being here. Thank you.
You're listening to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush.
Delmarva Today with Don Rush.